As you can see here on this map of the world, you can find mysterious and fascinating archaeological sites all over the world. From Pompeii, an ancient Roman city that once stood southeast of Naples in what is now Campania, Italy, to Machu Picchu, a lost city in western South America, all the way to ancient sites in Egypt, which connects northeastern Africa and the Middle East and dates back to the era of the pharaohs. Explorers and archaeologists have been traveling across different countries bearing evidence of their enigmatic journeys that are either mind-boggling or just downright impressive. These archaeological finds reveal secrets and challenge our ideas about human history. What significant discoveries have been made over the past years, and which ones have had the greatest influence on how scientists perceive humanity? Join us as we examine some of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries made by scientists. The Pompeii slave laborers. Archaeologists in the ancient Roman city of Pompeii have discovered an almost completely intact apartment that served as a kind of dormitory for slaves. 3 wooden beds, a chamber pot, a wooden chest, and a number of tall Roman jars called amphorae are all present in the room. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in AD 79, all of it was covered and preserved in sinerite, a sedimentary rock primarily composed of volcanic ash. The room was discovered in a villa in Civita Giuliana, a neighborhood to the north of the city, where archaeologists have made a number of extraordinary discoveries in recent years, including a complete ceremonial chariot and the bones of 2 victims said to have been a master and his slave. However, this discovery offers a unique window into the lives of slaves on a daily basis. One of history's most well-known natural disasters was the huge eruption of Vesuvius over 2,000 years ago, which killed thousands of people and buried Pompeii under 20 feet of ash, effectively stopping the entire city and its inhabitants in one terrible freeze frame. The city today houses priceless knowledge about living in the distant past and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This discovery provides crucial background for how the wealthy in the city relied on the efforts of others to flourish. This is a window into the perilous reality of people who rarely appear in the historical records, that are almost exclusively produced by aristocratic males and who consequently run the risk of being unknown in the big historical accounts. 3 laborers who would have performed daily tasks at the estate, including preparing and maintaining an amazing chariot found there, are believed to have resided in the room. 3 beds, one thought to have possibly belonged to a child and smaller than the other 2, line the walls. These beds are made from wooden planks that are then webbed with ropes. A wooden trunk that appears to contain components of the chariot's horse harnesses is nearby. It is filled with metal and fabric. Tall porcelain jugs are jammed into the room's corners, indicating that the space was apparently utilized for storage in addition to habitation. Light came from one little higher window. The most remarkable aspect of this room is how small and unstable it is. Even in the absence of significant treasures, this area serves as a singular testament to the human experience, in this case, that of the weakest members of ancient society. Largest child sacrifice site in the world. Archaeologists found the skeleton remains of 227 youngsters who were allegedly killed and buried in a large ritual sacrifice hundreds of years ago in the coastal desert north of Lima, Peru. According to researchers who excavated the site, the bodies found so far may only be the tip of the proverbial iceberg. This discovery represents the single largest child burial site on Earth. The pre-Columbian Chim culture, which emerged around the year 900 and lived along Peru's northern coast until they were subjugated by the Inca Empire around the year 1475, once favored the port city of Huanchaco, where the children's bodies were discovered facing the sea. The children's bodies were most likely buried between 600 and 800 years ago. The location is reminiscent of adjacent cemeteries where it appears that huge groups of kids were herded to the coast, stabbed in the chest one by one, then buried in mass graves. According to the archaeologists, the children in Huanchaco were between the ages of 4 and 14 when they passed away, and several of the bodies still had skin and hair on them. Archaeologists said it is likely that the children were killed as offerings to the gods who controlled the El Niño phenomenon, a semi-annual climate cycle that can cause catastrophic storms and hurricanes in South America. This is because of the site's location and the evidence that the bodies were buried during wet weather. Archaeologists had previously uncovered a site in Peru that is now known as Las Llamas, where approximately 140 children and 200 llamas had been massacred just the previous year. Why was the sacrifice made? This is still a puzzle. Between 5 and 14 years old when they were sacrificed, the buried children's chests had been cut open. According to John Verano, an anthropology professor at Tulane University in New Orleans, who co-directs the excavations at Las Llamas, at least some of the children had their hearts removed. Most of the kids were also discovered wearing red makeup on their faces. The scientists believe that the children passed away as a result of having their chests sliced open. It's also possible that they were slain first, using a different technique that didn't leave any evidence on their corpses. A group that archaeologists now refer to as the Chim controlled over a sizable portion of Peru at the time of the sacrifice. At a place called Chan Chan, these people constructed a sizable city and sophisticated works of art. Slavery was not a practice among the Chim as far as archaeologists are aware. This widespread child sacrifice appears to have taken place earlier than the Incas' conquest of the Chim, which happened around AD 1470. If the sacrifice wasn't connected to that takeover, it's possible that the Chim performed it because of the El Nino-related environmental issues and in the expectation that it would somehow improve things. There are no indications that the kids tried to avoid being sacrificed, and they seem to have been healthy and well-fed when they died. But several of the llamas made an effort to run away. The llamas had ropes around their necks to guide and manage them, and their tracks occasionally suggest this. The llamas were interred facing east toward the Andes Mountains, while the youngsters were laid to rest facing the sea. Nobody knows why this was done. One explanation is that since llamas originated in the highlands and the Chim had gods and artwork that emphasized marine elements, such as fish and seabirds, they turned the children toward the ocean. Helmets constructed from the skulls of children. A burial practice that could even make Indiana Jones shudder has been documented by archaeologists excavating a site near Salango, Ecuador. Excavations at the two 2,100-year-old funeral mounds turned up numerous unique pairs of remains, including the skeletons of two infants wearing what appear to be bone helmets constructed from the skulls of older kids. While performing excavations, archaeologists discovered the bones as well as those of 9 additional people, many of whom were interred with minor artifacts like figurines and shells. According to the archaeologists, one of the infants was roughly 18 months old, while the other was between 6 and 9 months old at the time of their death. A second juvenile's modified cranium was fitted over the first skull in a helmet-like manner, such that the primary person's face could be seen through and out of the second's cranial vault. Intriguingly, the researchers discovered a little shell and a finger bone wedged between the two layered skulls of the older infant's helmet, which originally belonged to a youngster between the ages of 4 and 12. The second baby's helmet was made from a child's head who was between the ages of 2 and 12. The older children's skulls probably still had flesh on them when they were put over the infants' heads, which is maybe the eeriest part, because juvenile skulls frequently do not hold together if they are just bare bone, according to what the archaeologists noted. In pre-Columbian South America, heads were frequently portrayed in iconography, ceramics, stone, and literally as heads. They typically stand for strength, ancestry, and the ability to rule over other groups, as seen in the making of trophy heads from defeated foes. The pre-social and wild spirits of the deceased might have been protected by the helmets as they traveled through the afterlife. An alternative explanation holds that the infant's progenitors originally wore the skull helmets both in life and in death. Another, less plausible theory is that the kids were the targets of a ritual intended to calm the volcano. However, the data implies the juveniles probably were quite unwell anyway, according to some scientists, even if the remains show no signs of trauma. The discovery still has scientists in a state of shock. It's unprecedented, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Frozen bodies of children sacrificed by Inca. 3 Inca mummies that were discovered in Argentina close to the high top of Volcan Uyayaco were so beautifully preserved that they gave a human face to the lengthy ceremony of Capacocha that culminated in their sacrifice. Now that the 13-year-old Uyayaco maiden and her younger companions, Uyayaco boy and Lightning girl, have been discovered, it's clear that drugs that cause mental confusion were used both in their actual deaths as well as in the year-long series of rituals that prepared them for their final moments. Coca and alcohol both have the ability to cause altered states, thought to be sacred in Inca religious doctrine. The drugs, however, probably also served a more practical purpose, confusing and sedating the young victims on the high hillside to help them accept their dismal destinies. Due to the extremely cold temperatures immediately below the mountain's 22,110-foot, 6,739-meter summit, the maiden and her youthful counterparts discovered in 1999 are in a remarkable state of natural preservation. The pristine condition of the objects and textiles arranged in the tomb-like structure, together with the extraordinary level of preservation, allowed specialists to reconstruct the events that occurred in this tenuous atmosphere some 500 years ago. This is even more terrifying because of that. This isn't a dried-up corpse or a collection of bones. This is a human being. This is a child. And the information that these researchers have gathered via these investigations certainly does point to some moving conclusions concerning these children's final months and years. The maiden's long braided hair contains a timeline of markers that record her diet, including the consumption of drugs like coca and alcohol in the form of chicha, a fermented brew made from maize. Hair grows about a centimeter a month and stays unchanged after that. According to the markings, she seemed to have been chosen for sacrifice a year before she actually perished. Her life drastically changed during this time, as did her escalating usage of alcohol and coca, which were then illegal drugs not intended for daily use. The medications might have rendered the maiden more submissive, stupefied, or perhaps unconscious on the day of her demise. Her unperturbed surroundings, including the objects around her and the feathered headdress she wore as she passed away, and her calm, seated position inside the tomb-like building, appear to confirm this notion. At the time of the mummy's discovery in 1999, chewed coca leaves were discovered in her mouth. Due to disparities in age and stature, or perhaps because of their lower standing in the ritual itself, the younger children exhibit lower levels of coca and alcohol consumption. And while other Capacocha locations exhibit signs of violence such as brain injuries, these children were allowed to go without incident. Either they succeeded in mastering the procedures for carrying out this kind of sacrifice, or the children behaved much more subtly. The mummies are currently housed in a museum in Argentina. The children's ability to still be recognized as human in their final moments is terrifying. It almost seems as though the kids can reach out and tell us their own stories. Hair in particular is such a personal thing. It's amazing how after 5 centuries, it's still able to tell us a lot about a person's life. Tutankhamun's tomb. One of the most well-known curses in the world is the Curse of the Pharaoh, also known as King Tut's Curse. Since King Tutankhamun's tomb was found, there have been persistent tales that anyone who violates the location of the boy king's ultimate resting place will be subject to a terrible curse. Even if it's not nearly as dramatic as a murderous mummy, it's generally accepted that many of the individuals involved in the opening of the tomb were soon cursed and died in mysterious circumstances. The legend gained prominence because a few of the people engaged in uncovering the tomb did in fact pass away quickly after it was found. The 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a British aristocrat and enthusiastic Egyptologist who helped fund the investigation, George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, likely had the highest profile death connected to the curse. It's widely believed that his death on March 25, 1923, a year after the tomb was opened, was mysterious. However, he had health issues before traveling to Cairo, and in any case, he died of a mosquito-borne disease. When the tomb was opened, there were 26 people present, and only 6 of them died within 10 years. Nearly 20 years after he opened the tomb, Howard Carter, the man who unquestionably would have been the main target of any curse, lived until 1939. So where did the curse come from? According to researcher James Randi, the 1922 discovery and unveiling of Tut's tomb was a momentous archaeological event. To keep the press at bay and give them something dramatic to cover, the head of the excavation team, Howard Carter, concocted a myth that anyone who defied the Boy King's edict would be cursed. Carter did not invent the idea of a cursed tomb, but he did make use of it to keep intruders away from his important discovery. What matters is that those who would damage their tombs believe in curses, regardless of whether Howard Carter or King Tut genuinely believed in them. And it was successful because a century after Tut's tomb was found, many people still maintain this opinion. The Easter Island Mysteries. Easter Island is a Polynesian island in the Pacific Ocean that belongs to Chile. Archaeologists have discovered 887 enormous statues there. The statues, which are referred to as Maui and date from between 1250 and 1500, are amazing monuments to the Rapa Nui people. These statues, some of which are about 30 feet tall and weigh as much as 80 tons, continue to be a mystery. The more archaeologists and scholars teach us about the secluded island, the more fascinating it gets. The sight of enormous stone statues that were both serenely godlike and viciously human was almost unfathomable to early explorers. The population of the island was too little, too primitive, and too remote to merit praise for such works of craftsmanship, engineering, and effort. Both history and art contributed to the uniqueness of this island, but there have been a lot of interpretations and counter-arguments to attempts to uncover that past. A little of the island's history has been disclosed through the missionaries' anecdotes, the archaeologists' shovel, the anthropologists' oral histories, and cartons of bones. But not everything by any means. When did the initial arrivals occur? From where did they originate? Why did they create statues that large? How were they raised onto platforms and moved? Such questions have received numerous responses, but the responses are always shifting. Archaeologists have gathered proof over the past 2 decades that the original settlers originated from another Polynesian island, but they can't agree on which one. The 1st to the 6th century AD are some of the dates put forth as estimates when people first arrived on the island. Another enigma is how they discovered the location, whether on purpose or by mistake. Some contend that without the use of modern high-tech devices, the navigators of the first millennium would never have been able to plot a course over such vast distances. Some claim that the early Polynesians were some of the most expert navigators in the history of the oceans, masters of the night sky and the ocean's currents. The feat it must have required to move the Maui across the island is what makes them so intriguing. According to legend, the Rapa Nui people used heavenly power to make the sculptures move. Whether a myth or not, it is still a fascinating idea. A funeral temple that dates back 4 millennia. Memphis, an ancient Egyptian metropolis, is home to the extensive burial grounds. More than a dozen pyramids, including the oldest in Egypt, the Pyramid of Djoser, can be seen at the UNESCO World Heritage Site. But one of the most intriguing finds was the identification of Queen Neat, the wife of King Teti, who lived 4,200 years ago. Her tomb was discovered near the Pyramid of King Teti, who ruled Egypt from 2680 to 2180 BC during the Age of the Pyramids. Inside 52 burial tunnels, also uncovered were more than 50 wooden coffins from the New Kingdom, which date to roughly 3,000 years ago. Each of these tunnels was between 30 and 40 feet deep. A 13-foot-long by 3-foot-wide papyrus with Chapter 17 of the Book of the Dead and the owner's name written in hieroglyphic form were also discovered. The field of Aru, or paradise, can be reached through navigating the afterlife, according to an ancient Egyptian book known as the Book of the Dead. This large papyrus had never before been found within a burial pit. At the location, there are also numerous wooden burial masks, a monument to the god Anubis, guardian of the cemetery, sculptures of Anubis, and games buried with the dead to keep them occupied in the hereafter. One of them was a game named 20 that still had the name of its previous owner. One of the games found in the shafts was called Senate Cross. Essentially, it's chess, but the winner receives a guarantee of eternal life, and the loser, well... The collection of right hands. 16 human skeletons were found by archaeologists buried in 4 ditches. 2 pits, one of which was in front of what is thought to be a throne room, each had 1 hand in them. The 14 remaining hands are housed in 2 more holes that were later built outside the palace. And even more unexpectedly, they're all right-handed. There was no sign of left hands. The artifacts were discovered in the Nile Delta, northeast of Cairo, around 3,600 years ago, at the time that the Hyksos, a people group thought to have originated in northern Canaan, ruled over a region of Egypt and established Tel el-Daba as their capital. When the hands were buried, King Kayan, one of the Hyksos kings, was dwelling in the palace. These hands may be the first concrete evidence of an ancient Egyptian practice that is depicted in text and art, wherein a soldier would exchange a severed enemy's right hand for money. It would have made it easier to count the casualties and would have served as a powerful symbol of defeat to cut off an enemy's right hand. You deprive him of all authority for all time. They might have been Levantine rivals of the Hyksos, or they might have been Egyptians. Both the Hyksos and the Egyptians had a regular military exercise that involved cutting off an opponent's right hand. The tomb wall of Ahmose, son of Abana, an Egyptian who fought the Hyksos, has 1 tail. The inscription, which was written about 80 years after the 16 hands were buried, reads as follows: "Then I fought hand to hand. I brought away a hand. It was reported to the royal herald. The writer received the gold of bravery as a reward for his efforts. Translation by James Henry Breasted, Ancient Records of Egypt, Volume 2, 1905. Ahmose captured 3 hands and was given gold in double measure during a later expedition against the Nubians to the south. Because there are no signs of this horrible practice in northern Canaan, the supposed homeland of the Hyksos, researchers are still dubious of its origins. They might have adopted an Egyptian rite from Egyptians, or it might have come from somewhere else different. It's important to keep in mind that the aggressive treatment of captives dates back to ancient Egypt.